Hey guys, how's it going? So let's go through this network test together, shall we? I've played through this area so many times now. I've been lucky enough to get a chance at pretty much every iteration of this demo, and I think I've come up with some good talking points. Some of these things we're going to talk about today are little secrets that I found after playing for so long, and some of them are just really important changes for the game as a whole, but mostly this is a chance to talk about Dark Souls 3 with the 9 hours of footage I managed to record, so let's get into it. After you choose your starting character, you spawn into this room, and behind you is an ornament that looks suspiciously like the Lordvessel from Dark Souls 1. Resting upon it is one of those swords that you find within a bonfire, the same sword that's used in the rumoured sacrifice bonfire mechanic that we haven't seen in action yet. If you're not familiar with the Lordvessel, it was this item in Dark Souls 1 that stored the souls of really powerful lords and unlocked the gate to the final boss, and having it also allowed you to warp between bonfires. I was thinking, in Dark Souls 3, you're able to warp between bonfires from the very start, according to Miyazaki, so maybe this signifies that. As we progress down this laneway, take a close look at these hollows off to the left and right. The first thing that struck me was that in this game, they're grey, not brown or green like in previous games. But what's most interesting about them is that they're praying, and that they pray to two specific things. They pray to the trees, and they pray to the dragons. Now, the dragons, I'm pretty sure, are the stone dragons from Dark Souls 1, whatever that implies, we'll get to later. And the trees are interesting too, because they have other hollows woven and grown into them. So, what are the implications of this? Why is there this powerful grey ashen theme throughout the entire game, and why are the hollows praying to trees and stone dragons? Well, once, grey arch trees and stone dragons was all that there was. This was the age of ancients, where everything was grey and lifeless, and nothing lived. Then there was the age of fire, and there was an age of darkness that always threatened it. These undead came to exist within this disparity. They were creatures that were unable to die, and were destined to go hollow and despair. My intuition tells me that these hollows here might be praying for some return to this grey age, where nothing lived and nothing died. And we mentioned before how there are hollows woven into the trees that they're praying to, and that's not the first time that we've seen that kind of rebirth. The giants in Dark Souls 2, they turned into trees and grew that way. Perhaps the hollows here are praying and hoping for some kind of rebirth in that kind of vein. But it's really bizarre. There's no real clear answer right now, but it awakens that curiosity we have, and it makes us ask, what part of the Dark Souls timeline are we in right now? And the fact that it awakens that curiosity at all, that's what's important. As we get into this next area, you gotta ask yourself, like, damn man, all these hollows have to do all day is sit around, and there's so many perfectly good chairs in this area, why isn't anyone sitting down? But why are there so many chairs here? What's interesting is that all these chairs are pointed towards the dragon, and what I get from this is that they're there for a reason. Maybe when these dragons landed or died, it looks like the inhabitants of the castle pulled out a bunch of chairs from inside and just sat watching the dragon as it flaked away. As they hollowed, they probably abandoned those chairs and got down on their knees instead. That's my take on it anyway. As we kill these enemies, take a look at the blood splatter effect. It's definitely reminiscent of Bloodborne, isn't it? And that blood splatter, it's a great effect, it's a welcome one, and it is nice that it's a little bit tuned down. You don't become drenched in blood like you do in Bloodborne. But to me, it's an indicator that this game is clearly running on an appropriation of Bloodborne's engine, and man, this engine feels good. I love it. You have that tight control over your character like you do in Bloodborne, yet they've tweaked it so that attacks feel segmented and controlled in that traditional Souls way. In Bloodborne, they were more flowing and ferocious. People are commenting that the game feels too fast, and I think when you think about it being too fast, it's worth remembering that characters felt really fast in this demo because equipment burden isn't a thing yet, and so we've yet to see what a character really feels like when they're burdened down by plate and weapons. In the network test, there were 4 tombstones that you could offer a flame to. This one reads, "Grave of a nameless retainer, raised his sword for the Lord of Cinder." Each one seems to tell the lore of someone who died here in this spot, if I'm not mistaken. This one, for example, explains a simple retainer's grave, and I'll bring up the rest as we get to them. The others are a bit more interesting. In one of the presentations I attended, I got to see Miyazaki present, and he said that it was his favourite little touch to add a giant fire-breathing dragon to the first level, and as usual, he delivers on that. One thing you mightn't have known is that you can actually kill this dragon with the mage class. It requires you to keep drinking your Ashtus flasks and replenish your mana, and that just made me remember, I really like how mana actually feels like a resource in this game, unlike having spell charges in previous Souls games. When you kill the dragon, you get 27k souls, which was fantastic in a demo where you couldn't use souls, but seriously, I think it's going to be amazing if you can kill that dragon early in the game in Dark Souls 3, because 27k at this point in the game, that's a ridiculous amount, considering this is one of the early levels. If you run through the fire, before or after it lands, it allows you to bypass the path to the side, and you can go under the dragon and avoid fighting a mob of enemies. But it's not really a shortcut, it's more like an alternate path. You face this spear-wielding soldier instead, and you get a few extra items for your trouble. One thing about taking this alternate path is that when you exit the room, like I'm doing here, you can expect to get ambushed. There are hollows hiding on the left and right of this door that aggro as soon as you walk past them, which perfectly interrupts your night fight. It's interesting though, if you walk perfectly down the middle of the path, they don't aggro. I was pretty impressed with the ambush timings in this game. There are a lot of thief-type hollows that will leap at you with startling accuracy, which really motivates you to keep the shield up at all times and check all those corners. I kept forgetting about this guy, for example, and his attacks are pretty punishing, and, even if you know he's coming at you, they hone in on you, so it's quite hard to dodge it, even in subsequent playthroughs. And halfway through this demo, I remembered that Embers are a thing. They weren't in previous versions. If you consume an Ember, it grants you a large bonus to your maximum health, it restores all your health, and it also opens you up to invading, summoning, and being invaded. Your character has his or her Ember restored, and the edges of your clothing become singed. I love the effect. Every game has something like this, but this Ember combines a lot of things from previous games. They actually retain that humanity shape from previous games, which is odd because our character doesn't even appear to have a physical hollow state. There's going to be an answer to that question, like why aren't we hollow, and why are we restoring our Ember? I'd even go as far as to say as we might not be a chosen undead in this game. Halfway through the stage, you'll come across this group of hollows who are praying to a tree on the top of a roof, but then one of them stands and walks towards you slowly, and then... This guy is intimidating, and he's really disorienting the first time you fight him. It's quite easy to fight him if you manage to stand behind it, but the trick is just that, staying behind it. When you first fight him, it's hard to figure out which part is his head, which part is his hand, which part is attacking you, and staying behind it is tough until you figure that out. You can actually kill this guy quickly, before he becomes a black mass, but few new players will figure this out first try. At this point, you can overlook most of the stage, and it's here that you realize how vertically they've designed this area. The path splits here, and it offers 3 different directions, different enemies to face, but only one destination, down. The fastest and most suicidal way down is to drop off this roof to the courtyard below, but very few people will do this. The ladder is the most logical option, and this right here is one of my favorite points in the demo from a design perspective. Pretend you're coming down this ladder right now. You might have seen that hollow over there, right? But it doesn't even look like he's facing you, so if you did see him, you've probably discounted him as not being a threat. And right next to this ladder is a doorway, and this doorway takes you on the longest path to the boss, with the most enemies and dead ends and risks of dying, but you don't know that. And then you get hit by this arrow. You might even realize that this arrow goes straight through the room here, so naturally you'll feel like you're endangered from some sort of sniper. You'll turn around and go and kill the guy shooting you, and then another guy will shoot you, so you'll go and kill him, then you get ambushed, and it's like a trail of breadcrumbs leading you towards the most logical option, because going down this really long ladder is the fastest way to the shortcut. But if you did decide to go through this doorway, then you're in for a longer path, and it has more dead ends and more difficult enemies. Hidden at the bottom of these stairs is the Dungeon Cell Key, which unlocks an optional mini-boss type enemy, as well as another lore stone. To honor and shadowy retreats, fear the sun's temptations and the winged executioner. You could even argue that the winged executioner is this fat knight who will be your next opponent. He has an executioner's axe, and he has these little wing-like protrusions on his back after all. But basically he's Bezuso from Berserk. He's likely going to be your most difficult enemy so far before you unlock the shortcut. He has a few tricks up his sleeve. For some reason he's not the kind of enemy you expect to cast magic, but he does. And he also has this charged spin attack that you're going to want to look out for, which can easily clip you on its last swing. It's also interesting that he's wearing blue. I was watching a Let's Play by another uploader called Hellkite Drake, and he mentioned that the blue color could represent how he's from a different army and he might be opposed to all these knights in the red. Additionally, he's an executioner standing in a courtyard full of headless knights, so those two things could be related as well, although you could easily make the argument to the contrary. I mean, if he's from a different faction, why are the other Red Knights just letting him live? And why hadn't they killed him before they all went hollow? And if he is an executioner, why are there statues holding their heads in their hands later on? That would imply that the statues were crafted before everyone got their heads cut off, and yeah, there's a few things that don't match up here. But that decapitation theme, it becomes really strong towards the end of the demo, with more and more statues depicting it, as well as lots of headless knights throughout the place. Just before the boss, you come across this area with a lot of knights, and one of them is even a Red-Eye Knight, which is a bit of a Demon's Souls throwback. When I fight all these guys, I use a lot of weapon arts, and it really made me feel like weapon arts are a great way to use mana. You know, when you use a spell, it's situational, and in the same way, when you use a weapon art, which consumes mana, it also feels situational. You commonly use it to break an opponent's guard, or to fling them up into the air, and it's just another tool you can use to take out really powerful enemies. This Red-Eye Knight is guarding a lore note, which reads, "This exile was chased from his homeland, and haunted by a black sun." In one of the cinematic trailers, you would have seen these hags, or pilgrims as they're called, travelling across a frozen wasteland with the shells on their back. Now, in the courtyard outside the boss room, you can see them here as well. They're all trying to climb over the fence or make their way towards the actual cathedral. It almost looked like some flash event occurred where they all became petrified at the same time. It's quite strange. Before we fight the boss, let's go and fight the Ice Knight. Do you guys remember that key I mentioned before? You can use it to unlock a cell door far below the second bonfire. This takes you down to the Ice Knight, and this dude is tough. He's fast, he's aggressive, he's mobile, and it takes roughly 20 hits to kill him with a light weapon. On top of all of that, if you stand close to him or get hit by his weapon, then it'll cause this frostbite meter to build up, and if this frostbite meter reaches full, then you're considered frostbitten for roughly 10 seconds or so, and you won't be able to regenerate stamina nearly as fast. So, in most cases, if you get frostbitten, then that's pretty much instant death, as you won't be able to block or dodge as effectively, and this guy is so aggressive that means you're gonna die. I expect the frostbite effect to be some sort of weapon enchantment or buff that you can apply, since it looks like it's a part of his weapon. If you do manage to kill him, it might take you a couple of tries. It allows you to read the last lore note, which reads, "Died in solitude. May his soul find its way back to the Frigid Valley." This is the final bit of proof that these graves refer to the hollowed creatures that reside near them. So at the end of one of the network test periods, I decided, I've kind of done everything, I might try to speedrun this, because I've played it so much. So on this character, I managed to get to the final boss and kill her in 3 minutes and 45 seconds from the very start of the game. And this shows that it's still possible to speedrun, even though enemies do try to get in your way more often than in previous games. But as long as you know where you're going, you can get there fast. The boss herself is pretty special. Her moveset is mesmerizing, and it's difficult to predict, and they've clearly made her butt really defined, so it distracts players. It's really clever. The camera also zooms out during the fight, just like in Bloodborne, so it's a bit easier to manage. And I love how the cathedral just becomes more and more on fire as this fight continues. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Like if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, and before you go, I'd really appreciate if you headed over to Jutas's channel. Jutas helped me out with some of the rendering settings for this video, and as a result you should notice it looking a little bit crisper and not as bad as YouTube usually makes it, so yeah, go check him out. He made a really good video on all the new changes in Dark Souls 3, and it goes into a lot of detail, so enjoy, and thanks for watching, guys.